When my wife Claire told me she wanted a divorce, it wasn't the shouting, crying scene most people imagine. It was quiet, almost too quiet. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same one we'd picked out together 6 years earlier when we moved into what was supposed to be our forever home. The morning light hit her hair the same way it always did, but her eyes had that look, the kind that told you something inside her had already packed up and left. She took a deep breath. "I've made up my mind," she said. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the small crack in the ceramic mug between my hands. I'd noticed it a few days ago. It didn't bother me then. It did now. "I want a divorce," she continued, her tone flat, rehearsed. Then she added with a small, almost triumphant smirk, "And I want the house." I looked up at her, trying to understand if she was serious, if there was still something left to save. But the way she said it, it wasn't a plea. It was a declaration of victory. "Claire," I said slowly, "this house was my father's before it was ours. I spent 10 years saving for it. You know that," she shrugged, leaning back in her chair. "And I spent years putting up with your long hours and your boring routine. I think I've earned it." Her words cut sharper than I expected. Earned it. That was her reasoning. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. "You can't afford a lawyer to fight me, Daniel. I've already spoken to one, and they told me everything I need to do to make sure I get what's fair." "Fair," I repeated under my breath. "You mean everything?" She didn't even blink. "If that's what it takes." The air between us went heavy, not from anger, not yet, but from realization. She wasn't bluffing. She'd planned this. She'd probably been planning it for months. I could see it now. The new clothes, the secretive phone calls, the sudden late nights, catching up with friends. It all clicked together like the final piece of a puzzle I didn't want to finish. "I see," I said finally. She got up, picked up her purse, and said, "I'll have the papers drawn up. You'll get them soon." And just like that, she left. The door closing behind her with the sound of something final, something that couldn't be undone. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the walls that held years of laughter, arguments, and silent apologies. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't even bring myself to turn on the lights. I thought about what she'd said, that I couldn't afford a lawyer. She was right. Between the mortgage, my small business barely keeping afloat after the last economic hit, and the quiet savings I'd been using to patch the gaps, I couldn't even afford to dream about hiring a top-tier attorney. But that didn't mean I was going to let her walk all over me. I'd been underestimated before, by clients, by family, by people who thought they were smarter, richer, more connected. I always found a way through. I didn't know how this time, but I would. Days turned into a week. The silence in the house was deafening. Then one morning, a knock on the door. Two knocks, firm and deliberate. When I opened it, a young man in a suit stood there holding an envelope. "Mr. Hale?" "Yes." "You've been served." He handed me the thick, cream-colored envelope and walked away without another word. I stood there for a while staring at it. My hands were shaking. Inside, the papers were clean, professional, cold. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The details were cruelly precise. Claire wanted the house, the car, half my business, and spousal support. I sat at the table where she'd broken the news a week earlier, the same table. And for the first time since she left, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. She'd actually done it. She'd gone to war. That night, I called a few lawyers, or tried to. Most of them quoted me retainers that were impossible. Some were polite about it, others weren't. One even said, "You'd be better off representing yourself if you can't meet the minimum." Represent myself against her lawyer? I almost gave up right there. But then, as I sat in the dim light of my study, staring at the framed photo of me and my brother Ethan from 10 years ago, a thought hit me. Ethan. He was the last person I wanted to call. We hadn't spoken properly in over 3 years, not since our father's funeral. He'd gone his own way. Big law, corporate clients, multi-million-dollar divorces, the kind of cases that made headlines. The kind of cases I used to joke about never being able to afford. And yet, here I was. I picked up my phone, thumb hovering over his contact. What would I even say? Hey, remember the brother you haven't talked to in years? I need a favor. No, I couldn't do that. So I put the phone down and told myself I'd figure something else out. But life, it seems, has a way of forcing your hand. 2 days later, I ran into Ethan by accident. At least it felt like an accident. But the truth? Maybe it wasn't. I'd gone downtown to deliver a set of design drafts to a client, one of the few who still believed in me. As I was walking past a cafe, I saw him. Same sharp suit, same calm confidence. Only his hair was a little grayer. He didn't see me at first. I hesitated. Then I walked over. Ethan? He looked up, surprised. Then a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Daniel. Wow. Been a while. Yeah, 3 years. He nodded. Too long. We made small talk for a while. Work, family, the usual things brothers say when they're both trying to pretend nothing's broken. But I could tell he saw it. The tiredness. The weight behind my words. Finally, he said, You look like hell. What's going on? I hesitated. Then I told him. Not everything. Just enough. When I mentioned the divorce, his eyes sharpened. When I said she wanted the house, he frowned. But when I told him what she'd said, You can't afford a lawyer to fight me, something in his expression changed. He leaned back, silent for a few seconds. Then he said quietly, Send me the papers. What? Send me the papers. Ethan, I can't pay you. I know what your time's worth. I'm not. He held up a hand. I didn't ask for payment. I stared at him, unsure if I'd heard him right. He finished his coffee, stood up and said, I'll see you in court. That night, I barely slept again. Not because I was scared this time, but because for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. Of course, I didn't fully believe he'd show up. Maybe he just wanted to help me file a response or give me some advice. But deep down, I hoped he meant what he said. I needed this win, not for revenge, but for dignity, for the piece of me that Claire thought she could crush under her heel and walk away from. The day of the hearing came faster than I expected. The courthouse smelled like stale paper and coffee. My palms were sweating as I walked through the doors, clutching the file folder that contained everything. My life, my savings, my last shred of stability. When I saw Claire standing there with her attorney, a polished man in a blue suit with a rehearsed smile, I felt that old mix of anger and heartbreak rise in my throat. She looked radiant, almost smug, like she'd already won. Then she saw me, alone, no lawyer beside me. Her smirk deepened. I told you, she whispered when I walked past. You can't win this. I didn't reply. I just sat down at the defendant's table and exhaled slowly. And then, the door behind me opened. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. I heard the quiet confidence in those footsteps. Ethan walked in, carrying a sleek leather briefcase, his expression unreadable. Claire's attorney froze mid-sentence. Claire's smile faltered. Ethan walked right past them, stopped beside me, and pulled out a chair. He set his briefcase on the table, turned to her and said calmly, He doesn't have to afford me. I'm his older brother. The silence that followed could have cracked glass, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I smiled. When Ethan said those words, He doesn't have to afford me. I'm his older brother. The entire courtroom seemed to pause. Even the clerk, who'd been typing monotonously for the last 5 minutes, froze mid-keystroke. Claire blinked rapidly, trying to process what she was seeing. Her lips parted slightly, like she was about to say something clever, but nothing came out. Her lawyer was the first to recover. He cleared his throat and said stiffly, Mr. Hale, if you intend to represent the respondent, I assume you're licensed in this jurisdiction? Ethan opened his briefcase calmly, pulled out a folder, and handed over a card. I am, and I filed my appearance an hour ago. You should have received notice. The man's face tightened as he checked his phone. Then he went pale. He had. Claire shot him a sharp look. Frustration, disbelief, maybe even panic. Ethan turned to me, voice low but steady. You okay? I nodded. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't standing alone. The hearing began, and right from the opening statements, Ethan took command. He wasn't loud, but he had that kind of presence. The kind that made everyone listen without needing to raise his voice. Claire's attorney started with his practice speech. How my wife had supported me emotionally, how she'd sacrificed her time and youth, how the marriage had broken down beyond repair, and that she was simply seeking fair compensation. It was neat, polished, almost beautiful in its performance. But when Ethan stood up, the tone shifted. He walked to the center of the courtroom, every step measured, deliberate. Then he said, "Your Honor, fairness is not measured by who cries louder or who hires first. It's measured by contribution, tangible, factual, and provable." He turned to Claire's side of the table. My client built that home brick by brick. Not metaphorically, but literally. He handled the renovations himself. He paid the mortgage, maintained the business, and handled every financial obligation while his wife enjoyed the benefits of stability. Claire's lawyer objected, muttering something about tone. Ethan didn't even glance at him. He continued, "We will prove not only that Mrs. Hale's claims are inflated, but that her petition is rooted in entitlement, not need." The judge, an older man with thinning gray hair, raised an eyebrow. "Proceed, Mr. Hale." Over the next 2 hours, Ethan dismantled their arguments piece by piece. Every document Claire's lawyer presented, Ethan had a counter for it. Every claim she made, he had proof to neutralize it. Bank records, renovation receipts, tax filings, even a few social media posts she probably forgot existed, showing her bragging about Daniel's project paying off and our dream home. At one point, Ethan asked her directly, "Mrs. Hale, do you recall posting on May 17th that your husband was the reason we finally own something that's ours?" Her eyes darted. "That was just social media talk." "So were you lying then? Or are you lying now?" The courtroom went dead silent. Even the judge's pen stopped moving. Claire looked at the judge helplessly. "Your Honor, I feel like I'm being attacked." Ethan didn't soften. "This isn't an attack, Mrs. Hale. It's accountability." She glared at him, then at me. Pure venom in her stare. I didn't look away. At recess, we stepped outside. I leaned against the hallway wall, exhaling hard. "You're incredible," I muttered. Ethan smirked. "I'm efficient." Then after a pause, he said quietly, "I'm sorry it had to get this far." I turned to him. "You mean between me and Claire?" He shook his head. "Between us." I didn't know what to say. We hadn't spoken since our father's funeral, when grief had turned into argument and pride had turned into silence. But standing there, watching him go to war for me without asking for anything in return, I realized something. Blood might dry up over time, but it never disappears. When the hearing resumed, things got uglier. Claire's lawyer tried to pivot. He brought up emotional distress, claiming I'd been cold, distant, and inattentive for years. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Do you have evidence of that?" The man hesitated. "Well, Mrs. Hale's testimony," Ethan cut in sharply. "So no documentation, no witnesses, just interpretation?" The lawyer stammered. "We have her personal journal, which conveniently surfaced after the divorce petition was filed," Ethan said. "No timestamps, no corroboration, just stories." He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, if we're accepting rewritten hindsight as evidence, we're no longer in a court, we're in a therapy session." The courtroom chuckled. The judge tried to suppress a smile. Claire's lawyer turned red. Claire herself looked like she wanted to vanish. After 3 long hours, the judge called another break before deliberations. I followed Ethan outside to the courtyard. He loosened his tie, looked up at the sky, and said, "You're lucky." I frowned. "Lucky?" He nodded. "Most people walk into divorce court and lose everything. You walked in with me." I smiled faintly. "Yeah, about that. Why did you do it?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he said, "Remember Dad's last words?" I hesitated. He said, "Look after each other." Ethan nodded slowly. I didn't, and I've regretted it ever since. There it was. The thing we never said out loud. The reason for the silence. We'd both failed at being brothers when it mattered most. But not today. When we walked back into the courtroom, Claire's energy had shifted. The confidence was gone, replaced by something desperate. Her lawyer whispered to her frantically, but she wasn't listening anymore. She was staring at me. When the judge finally spoke, the entire room held its breath. Having reviewed the evidence and testimony, he began, this court finds no substantial grounds to award spousal support. The marital home shall remain in joint possession until such time as an equitable buyout can be arranged by Mr. Hale. Additionally, Mrs. Hale's petition for a majority claim in Mr. Hale's business is denied. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Claire froze. Her lips trembled as she realized what had just happened. Her entire plan collapsing piece by piece. Ethan leaned toward me and whispered, "We're not done yet." He stood, walked to the bench and said, "Your Honor, before we adjourn, the respondent requests consideration of legal costs. My client was forced to defend against baseless claims and should not bear the financial burden of such litigation." The judge looked at Claire's lawyer. "Counsel?" The man swallowed hard. "We have no objection." Ethan smiled. Small, precise, lethal. "Then, Your Honor, we ask that Mrs. Hale cover the full legal fees." The gavel came down. "Motion granted." Claire's lawyer slumped. Claire's jaw dropped. I just sat there, stunned. The same woman who told me I couldn't afford a lawyer was now being ordered to pay for mine. Outside the courthouse, the cool air hit like a blessing. Ethan walked beside me, silent, until we reached the steps. Claire came storming out moments later, heels clacking on the stone. She stopped in front of us, fury burning behind her eyes. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "You humiliated me." Ethan's voice was calm but cutting. "No, you did that to yourself." She turned to me. "You couldn't win without him." I met her gaze. "Maybe, but I didn't need to. I just needed to stop losing to you." Her face twisted. Then she walked off, fast, her lawyer chasing after her. Ethan looked at me, half smiling. "You handled that better than I thought you would. Guess I learned from the best." He chuckled softly. "You're not wrong." We stood there for a long time, not saying much, just breathing. For the first time in a long time, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was healing. That night back home, I poured 2 glasses of whiskey. Ethan sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where it all began. "This house," I said quietly, "was never just a building. It was proof that I could build something real." He nodded. "And now it's proof you can defend it." We drank. I looked at him and said, "Thank you for showing up." He leaned back, his expression softening. "You'd have done the same." I smiled. "Maybe." He laughed. "No, you definitely would have called sooner." When he left that night, I stood at the doorway, watching his car disappear down the street. The house was still, peaceful. For the first time in months, it didn't feel empty. But the story didn't end there. Because in the weeks that followed, Claire tried to twist the narrative again. Online, through friends, even through mutual acquaintances. She painted herself as the victim, the poor woman blindsided by an ungrateful husband and his cutthroat lawyer brother. I ignored it at first, but then something unexpected happened. People started reaching out to me. Former neighbors, old co-workers, even people she'd once bragged to. They'd seen the truth for themselves. They'd heard enough lies, and little by little, her web began to unravel. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't even looking for vindication. All I wanted was peace. But peace, I learned, sometimes comes wrapped in poetic justice. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. No nightmares, no restless tossing, no replaying old arguments in my head. Just silence. Real, peaceful silence. When I woke up, the morning light spilled through the curtains and the house, my house, felt different. It didn't echo anymore. It breathed. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring at the spot where Claire had once said, "You can't afford a lawyer to fight me." Now, every time I remembered those words, I didn't feel bitterness, just clarity, because she'd been right in one way. I couldn't afford a lawyer. But what she didn't realize was that loyalty is worth more than money. And brotherhood, that's priceless. Over the next few weeks, I started putting my life back together, piece by piece. I threw myself into my business again, designing with a focus I hadn't felt in years. Every client call, every late-night sketch, every signed contract, it all felt like a small victory. I fixed up the garden, repainted the porch, even repaired the loose steps she had always nagged me about. Not for her, for me. There's something healing about rebuilding the same walls someone else tried to take away from you. You stop seeing them as reminders of pain and start seeing them as proof of survival. Ethan checked in often. Sometimes we'd talk about the case. Mostly we didn't. He'd stop by with a bottle of whiskey or a box of takeout, sit on the porch with me, and we'd talk about life. No grand speeches, no dramatic apologies, just brothers making up for lost time. One night I asked him, "When did you decide to take the case?" He thought for a moment, then said, "The moment I heard her say you couldn't afford to fight." "Why that?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Because I've spent my career fighting for people who could afford anything, and it never felt right. But this mattered." I nodded slowly. There was something powerful in that. Not just about family, but about principle. Sometimes that standing up for the right person means standing against everything comfortable. Claire's noise eventually faded. Her online rants stopped getting attention. People saw through the act, the same way I finally had. One evening, out of nowhere, she called. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail. Her voice tired, hollow, stripped of all that arrogance. "Daniel," she said, "I didn't expect it to go like this. I thought I was doing what I deserved, but I lost more than I planned. I hope you're happy now." She paused, then added softly, "You were a good husband." I just wasn't ready to see it. I deleted the message. Not out of anger, out of peace. Some things don't need answers. Months passed. Life took on rhythm again. My business grew stronger. Word spread about the designer who fought his own divorce and came out stronger. Clients liked that story. It gave them something human to believe in. But more than that, I liked it because it was true. I wasn't broken anymore, just reshaped. Ethan and I started spending more weekends together, hiking, catching up, even watching old home movies from when we were kids. It felt strange at first, but comforting too. One night, as we sat around a small bonfire behind my house, he said, "You know what Dad would have said about all this?" I smiled. "Probably something about keeping the peace." He laughed. "Yeah, and then he'd lecture me for letting you handle things alone." I nodded. "Guess we both learned something." He raised his glass. "To learning late, but not too late." I clinked mine against his. "To brothers." The firelight flickered between us, bright, warm, alive. A few weeks later, I received a letter from the court, finalizing the divorce decree. It was official. No appeals, no loose ends. Just closure, printed in black and white. I stared at the document for a while, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. Not because I wanted to remember it, but because I wanted to remind myself how far I'd come. Some battles don't end when the gavel falls. They end when you finally stop replaying the sound of it. That night, I went for a long drive, windows down, radio low. The city lights blurred into soft streaks as I passed familiar streets. Every corner had a memory, but none of them hurt anymore. I pulled over near the lake where Claire and I had once taken photos after buying the house. Back then, I thought that moment would define the rest of my life. But standing there now, I realized something powerful. It didn't. What defined me wasn't who left. It was who stayed, and who I became when I had no one else. A few days later, Ethan invited me to his office for lunch. When I arrived, his assistant smiled like she already knew me. "You're the famous brother," she said with a grin. "Famous?" I laughed. She nodded. "Word travels fast around here. That case, it's become kind of a legend. Your brother's never taken a family case before." When I stepped into his office, Ethan was on the phone. He waved me in, pointed to the chair across from his desk. The room was sleek. Glass walls, framed degrees, city view. It looked like a different world from mine, but somehow it felt familiar now. He hung up and smiled. "How's the empire?" "Growing," I said. Slowly, but steadily, he leaned back. Good. You deserve that. Then almost casually, he reached into a drawer and slid an envelope toward me. What's this? Refund, he said. I frowned. Refund? For what? He smirked. The legal fees she paid. I don't need it. It's yours, I shook my head. No, you earned that. He pushed it closer. So did you. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Just two brothers sitting in quiet understanding. No debts, no grudges, no imbalance. As I drove home that afternoon, I realized how different my life felt. Not perfect, just real. The kind of real you can't buy, fake, or manipulate. When I pulled into the driveway, the sun was setting behind the house. The light hit the walls just right, turning everything gold. I stood there for a long moment, breathing it in. The scent of paint, the hum of the evening air, the peace that only comes after surviving chaos. And then I smiled, because the same place that once symbolized loss had become a reminder of strength. A year later, I got a wedding invitation in the mail. Ethan was getting married. I showed up early. Suit pressed, nerves calm. When he saw me, he grinned. Didn't think you'd wear a tie. I laughed. Didn't think you'd ever settle down. We hugged, not the quick, polite kind, but the kind that fixes something broken inside you. During his vows, I found myself tearing up, not because of nostalgia, but because of pride. He'd found his peace too. After the ceremony, we sat under the stars, sharing a quiet drink. He turned to me and said, "You ever think about dating again?" I smiled. Not yet. Maybe someday. But right now, I'm happy being free. He raised his glass. To freedom. I raised mine. To family. Looking back now, I realize that the divorce didn't destroy me. It revealed me. It stripped away every illusion I'd built around what love should be, and showed me what loyalty actually looks like. Not the kind that comes from romance or vows, but the kind that stands beside you in silence when the world turns its back. When Claire tried to take everything, I thought I'd lost my foundation. But in truth, she just cleared the ground for something stronger to be built. And I built it. Not alone, but with the help of the one person I'd almost forgotten I could trust. People often say, revenge is sweet. They're wrong. Closure is sweeter. Peace is priceless. And having someone who walks into court just to remind you that you're not fighting alone, that's everything. Now, every time I walk through this house, I see more than memories. I see resilience. I see brotherhood. I see proof that life can take everything from you and still hand you back something better. And sometimes all it takes is the right person sitting beside you when everyone else expects you to stand alone.